Actually, yes. I finally found a way to be able to add borders to your photos directly in Lightroom. No need to jump to Photoshop anymore for this simple detail. And before I tell you that I actually made presets and you can achieve this effect with one click, I first want to tell you the story of what I needed to learn in order to get all this working. And no, there is no way to do this by default. You can reduce the scale in the transform tab, and if you haven't messed around with correction control for the distortion of your lens, you might be able to achieve a bit of white around your photos and export it like that out of Lightroom. And it's not even gonna be white if you don't export it as a JPEG. But if you cropped your photos or adjusted the perspective control or lens control or anything that has to do with manipulating the edges of your photo, there's no more straight border for you. Now, to be able to add white borders into Lightroom, we need two things. We need white and we need a way to define a border. The first one is really easy. In order to get pure white into Lightroom, all I have to do is go into the curves panel and raise both of the points to 255. This yields perfectly white pixels. And with half of the work done, I just needed a way to define a border. And Lightroom has no idea what a border is. So I need to be able to select a border and then apply my custom curves in order to get white. And I'm gonna resort to masking. But with all these options, it's actually more complicated than it seems. You might be tempted to say, well, create 4 linear gradients, one of each side of the image, and that just doesn't work. Ask me how I know? Well, I spent around 1 day playing around with that. Not the most fun I've ever had. But before I can explain to you why that doesn't work, I'll have to explain how the entire Lightroom coordinate system works, and that will actually help us understand how to build borders later on. So buckle up. I truly know that this is going to ruin somebody's day, but Lightroom doesn't care about your megapixel count. You can't impress a piece of software like that anymore. Instead, for masking purposes, Lightroom will transform your image into an X and Y coordinate system. This is the X-axis and this is the Y-axis. They both start from 0 and go to 1. So any point in this entire image has a X coordinate and a Y coordinate. And this one over here is probably something like 0.3, and on Y-axis is something like 0.7. And that's pretty much it. It's rather simple to understand how this works. But how's that relevant for a linear gradient? Well, when you click in here and you go to linear gradient, you click on an image, drag, and then release. And Lightroom will store the point where you first clicked on your image and where you released the gradient. Knowing those 2 points, it can now define the gradient and even store it in a preset. And because Lightroom stores the preset as code, it's gonna look something like this. I know showing code is not okay on YouTube, but this doesn't work because whenever you apply some kind of lens correction, points in the image tend to shift around. And when that happens, bada bing bada boom, your borders are now slanted. So what I've done instead is used a brushed mask. Each line with a brush is stored by Lightroom as a list of points along the line. So if I do something like this, Lightroom will store a list of all the points starting from x being basically 0 to x being around 1 and the coordinates of y being almost 0 because the line is almost at the top of the image. And almost is the keyword here because I applied the brush by hand. It's not going to be precise. So after that, I'm going in and modifying the code. So in here, where you can see the y-axis is 0.01 something something, I've come in here and replaced it with 0.0001, so it's right against the border. But for the x coordinate, where you can see there's not really something cohesive, I wrote another script that generates this list on the screen right now, but with a smaller increment so the line remains constant no matter the size of your photo. And that's progress. I can use the same technique and define a stroke against the other sides as well. But how do I control the size of my borders and the softness? Well, that's easy as well. You see, in the Lightroom preset file, I have these parameters, which are one-on-one to the size and the radius of the brush. And guess what? Brush radius is a percentage of the weight of your image. So you can just define something like 0.02, and that means that the brush will be something like 2% of the size of your image. And to be honest, by this point, I kinda started to like the way Lightroom defines everything from 0 to 1. I can scale the brush size and adjust the weight of the borders with a text parameter in a preset file. So all I had to do now is generate more presets so I can have more sizes to pick from. And that's how I ended up with 6 different sizes. It starts with extra slim, which is just a few pixels on the edges of the image, and it goes to thick, which is kind of a lot. You can see it on the screen right now. And while I was there, I also made black borders. They're both in a pack on my website. But let's talk about the quirks of this method, because since this is just a workaround, there are a few problems with it. So in here in Lightroom, I'm going to apply a thick border this time. And what you're going to notice is that the border is on top of the image. Yeah, this method is cropping in. But as long as you use a thin border, you're not really losing much. And if you're using a thick one, I hope you know what you're doing. Problem number two comes when you want to adjust the crop of your photo. Of course, the border is just a mask, so it's not gonna automatically scale with the image and the crop that you're applying. But all you have to do is come in the preset tabs and apply the border once again, and it will readjust to the current aspect ratio of your photo. Problem number three pops up when you use lens distortion after you applied the border. As you can see, it vanished. But what actually happened is that Lightroom actually moved it outside the image. Again, not a problem. All we have to do is reapply a border. But there's one more thing. With the distortion tool or with the help of the transform tab over here, we can get these white borders from Lightroom. And those are zones where there is no more photo, basically zero information, and Lightroom treats that as transparency. So we cannot apply a mask on top of that. You can either click constraint crop, and that would crop the image so it doesn't have any transparent zones, and then reapply the mask, or sorry, but this time you'll actually have to go to Photoshop and fill in those edges. But even with all these quirks, I think the method actually has some benefits. I don't have to duplicate my files just because I want to add a border on top of them. I don't have to go to Photoshop. And most importantly, I can actually adjust my image with the border on to compensate for the perceived visual changes when I have a border on my photo. That actually matters a lot. And now that you know my method, you have two options. You can either spend the time and make your own if you want borders of any shape, size, or color, or you can go to my website, look for Lightroom presets, and support me and the work that I'm doing. Of course, if you want some custom looking borders or you have an idea that relates to this topic, hit me up on Instagram or any other instant messaging platforms. I'm happy to discuss and maybe even make you some custom borders, or maybe you could help me with an idea to expand the bundles that I already have on the website. One thing that I'm thinking about making would be borders with rounded corners. Let me know if you're interested about that in the comments down below. And until the next time, I really hope that I didn't bore you with all the code that I showed on screen.